The chamber was so vast that Ambassador David Grant could barely see the ceiling. Crystalline walls stretched upward into darkness, pulsing with strange bioluminescent patterns that hurt his eyes when he looked at them too long. All around him, rising in massive tiers that formed a perfect circle, sat the representatives of the Galactic Council. Hundreds of alien species, each more bizarre than the last. Some had multiple heads. Others floated in containment fields filled with toxic gases. A few were so large they occupied entire platforms, while others were microscopic colonies visible only through holographic magnification. David stood in the center of the chamber, suspended on a gravity platform that held him exactly 3 meters above the polished floor. Beside him were the only other 2 humans in the room. Captain Nina Cross wore her military uniform with practiced precision, her hand resting casually near her sidearm. Dr. Thomas Reed looked uncomfortable in his formal diplomatic robes, constantly adjusting his collar. The noise in the chamber was overwhelming. Clicking mandibles, electromagnetic bursts, chemical signals translated through speakers, guttural roars, and musical tones all blended into a cacophony that made David's translator implant work overtime. Every species was talking at once, discussing the humans like they were specimens in a laboratory. Then a sound like thunder silenced them all. Supreme Arbiter Vornicus had struck his gravity hammer against the central podium. The shockwave rippled through the air, making David's bones vibrate. Vornicus was massive, easily 4 meters tall, scales that looked like polished obsidian, and eyes that glowed with an internal fire. His species, the Krevnari, had founded the Galactic Council 3,000 years ago. The species known as humanity will now answer for their crimes against galactic order, Vornicus announced. His voice was deep enough to make David's chest ache. You stand accused of 17 violations of the Sacred Accords. Unauthorized military expansion. Illegal colonization beyond approved boundaries. Refusal to pay tribute to regional administrators. And most serious of all, resistance to mandatory economic integration. David waited until the murmuring died down. He had prepared for this moment for 6 months. Every word had been carefully chosen. Every possible response from the council had been anticipated. Supreme Arbiter, honored delegates, he began, keeping his voice calm and clear. Earth has received your ultimatum. We understand the charges. We have prepared our answer. Vornicus leaned forward, his massive head blocking out the light from behind him. There is no answer required, human. Only obedience. You will surrender control of your military forces. You will accept council governors on all colony worlds. You will open your trade networks to mandatory integration. You have 30 seconds to agree or face the consequences. Around the chamber, David could feel the weight of countless eyes watching him. Some species looked excited, anticipating another easy conquest. Others seemed bored, having witnessed this scene dozens of times before. A few appeared almost sympathetic, remembering when they had stood in this same position. Supreme Arbiter, David said slowly, before we give our answer, may I ask a question? Vornicus's eyes narrowed. You may ask, I may answer. How many species has the Council integrated in the past century? There was a pause. Vornicus consulted a holographic display that materialized before him. 47 species have been welcomed into the galactic community in the last 100 standard cycles. Welcomed, David repeated. Is that what you call it when you threaten isolation and destruction unless a species submits to your authority? The chamber erupted. Several delegates roared their disapproval. Others clicked angrily or flashed aggressive color patterns. Vornicus slammed his gravity hammer again. You dare question the Council's methods? We bring order to chaos. We prevent wars. We create prosperity through unity. You create empire through force, David replied. His voice remained steady despite his racing heart. You call it many things. Order, unity, the galactic community. But we call it what it really is. Conquest. Delegate Rixner of the Keshari Collective stood abruptly, his forearms gesturing wildly. This is outrageous. You represent a single world. One species with barely 300 ships. We are the Council of 70, representing thousands of worlds, millions of vessels, and quadrillions of citizens. You cannot stand against us. David turned to face him directly. You're right about one thing, Delegate. We are one species from one world. We tried cooperation. We sent diplomats. We negotiated in good faith. We followed your rules and paid your taxes. We accepted your restrictions even when they hurt us. He paused, letting his words sink in. And you interpreted our patience as weakness? Captain Cross stepped forward, her boots clicking against the gravity platform. Supreme Arbiter, may I demonstrate something? Vornakis waved a clawed hand dismissively. If you wish to waste the Council's time, Nina activated her wrist display. Behind the human delegation, a massive hologram materialized, showing Earth in real-time transmission. The blue and green planet rotated peacefully against the black of space, looking small and vulnerable. That is Earth, Nina said. Our home world. Population 8 billion. It looks defenseless, doesn't it? Several delegates laughed. One species made a sound like grinding glass that David's translator interpreted as mockery. Supreme Arbiter Nina continued, Could you tell us how many Council military vessels are currently stationed in this system? Vornicus looked confused by the question, but answered anyway. This is our capital system. The Grand Fleet maintains permanent position here. Approximately 47,000 vessels of various classifications. Why do you ask such an obvious question? And how many Council home worlds are within 50 light-years of this location? 32 major worlds, including the founding species' home planets. Vornicus' confusion was turning to suspicion. What is the purpose of these questions? Nina smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. I'm establishing context. You see, 3 minutes ago, when Ambassador Grant activated his wrist communicator, he sent a coded signal. That signal was received by elements of Earth's military that have been positioned throughout this sector for the past week. The chamber went silent. Every delegate was suddenly paying full attention. Positioned. Vornicus repeated slowly. Your fleet is in Sol System. Our intelligence has tracked every human vessel. There are no human ships in this sector. No human ships that you can detect, David corrected. Tell me, Supreme Arbiter, in all your 3,000 years of spacefaring civilization, has the Council ever encountered a species that truly mastered stealth technology? The silence deepened. Several species began frantically checking their sensor networks. Dr. Reed spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly firm. While you were monitoring our conventional fleet, cataloging our known military assets, and feeling secure in your overwhelming superiority, we were building something else entirely. We were building in the shadows between stars. In the dark places you never thought to look. This is a bluff, Delegate Rixner declared, but his voice lacked confidence. You could not possibly hide a significant military force from our surveillance systems. Could we not? David asked. Supreme Arbiter, I suggest you contact your fleet commanders. Ask them to scan for quantum displacement signatures within a 30 million kilometer radius of this station. Vornicus hesitated, then activated his personal communication device. The entire chamber watched as he spoke rapidly with someone on the other end. His expression changed from annoyance to confusion to something that might have been fear. When he looked up, his glowing eyes had dimmed slightly. Fleet Command reports unusual readings. Thousands of signatures appearing where there was nothing moments ago. It's not appearing, Captain Cross said softly. They've been there all along. Silent, invisible, waiting for my signal. Every major military installation in this sector is currently targeted. Every shipyard. Every supply depot. Every Council home world within range. And all of it can be reduced to expanding clouds of plasma in less than 4 minutes. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for evacuation. A few sat in stunned silence. Unable to process what they were hearing, David waited for the noise to peak. Then spoke again, his voice somehow cutting through the pandemonium. We tried peace. You demanded surrender. Now witness humanity's true answer. Supreme Arbiter Vornicus slammed his gravity hammer 3 times before the chamber quieted enough for him to speak. His scales had darkened to an angry black, and smoke drifted from his nostrils. Around him, delegates were still frantically communicating with their home governments, military commanders, and intelligence networks. David Grant remained perfectly still on the gravity platform, watching the chaos with careful eyes. This was the moment everything could fall apart. If the Council decided to call their bluff, if even one species launched a preemptive strike, the entire plan would collapse into actual war. And despite humanity's preparations, a real war against the Galactic Council would be devastating for everyone. "Explain yourself, human," Vornicus demanded. His voice was quieter now, more dangerous. "You claim to have hidden fleets in our capital system. You threaten the Council itself? This is an act of war, is it?" Davi D asked calmly. "What would you call sending an ultimatum demanding we surrender our sovereignty or face destruction? What would you call economic sanctions designed to cripple our ability to feed our people? What would you call military exercises conducted just outside our territory as a show of force?" Delegate Rixner stood again, his forearms trembling. Those were legitimate diplomatic pressures. Standard procedures for encouraging cooperation. "You mean standard procedures for forcing submission?" Captain Nina Cross interjected. "We studied your history, Delegate. We know what happened to the Talvek people when they refused integration. You blockaded their worlds for 3 years until they had no choice but to accept your terms. We know about the Grenchi, whose entire military was dismantled after they dared to challenge Council authority. We know about 47 different species who tried to maintain their independence and failed." Dr. Thomas Reed pulled up a new holographic display. It showed a timeline stretching back 12 years, to the moment humanity first made contact with the Galactic Council. "Let us show you exactly how we got here. Let us show you what you forced us to become." The hologram shifted, showing images of Earth's first contact with the Council. Celebrations in city streets. World leaders shaking appendages with alien ambassadors. The signing of preliminary agreements. "We were excited," David said, his voice taking on a narrative tone. "Humanity had dreamed of meeting other species for centuries. When your scout ships found our FTL test vessel near Alpha Centauri, we thought our greatest dream had come true. We were invited to join the galactic community. We thought it meant friendship, partnership, learning from species far older and wiser than ourselves." The images changed, showing human delegates in council chambers, always looking small and confused, surrounded by species who ignored them or spoke over them. Within 3 months, we learned the truth. The galactic community was not a community. It was a protection racket. Join or be isolated. Accept our terms or face embargo. Allow our bases on your worlds or be declared hostile. David's voice hardened. Our first ambassador, Margaret Torres, spent 4 years trying to negotiate fair trade agreements. Every single proposal was rejected, not because they were unreasonable, but because the Council does not negotiate. You dictate. Vornicus shifted uncomfortably on his platform. The Council maintains order across thousands of worlds. Some species must be guided toward proper integration for the good of all. Guided, David repeated. Such a gentle word for what you actually do. The hologram changed again, showing a series of incidents. Human cargo vessels being detained at Council checkpoints. Colony ships being turned away from resource-rich systems. Human traders arrested on charges that were never quite explained. Dr. Reed continued the narration. 2 years after first contact, you demanded we pay a transportation tax for using jump gates our own ships had helped repair. The tax was 70% of cargo value. When we protested, you reminded us that refusing council fees was grounds for expulsion from civilized space. 3 years after contact, Nina added, you demanded we accept council military observers on our colonies. Not advisors. Not liaisons. Observers who reported directly to council headquarters and had authority to override local human governments. When we refused, you conducted military exercises just outside our territory for 6 months straight. 4 years after contact, David said, you proposed a mutual defense treaty that would require Earth to contribute 40% of our military vessels to Council operations. While the Council committed exactly 0 vessels to defending human territory, when we suggested revising the terms, you accused us of being unwilling to participate in galactic security. The pattern was clear. Every interaction showed the Council making demands in humanity, trying to accommodate while maintaining some shred of independence. We tried to work within your system, David continued. We paid your taxes even when they hurt our economy. We accepted your inspectors even when they were clearly spies. We attended your meetings even when you ignored everything we said. We bent, we compromised. We adapted to your rules. And you interpreted our flexibility as weakness, Nina finished. You thought we were just another young species that would eventually submit like all the others.
Ass!
Delegate Moralax of the Veterinary Federation spoke up. His species communicated through color changes in their translucent skin, which the translation system rendered as speech. If you were so opposed to integration, why did you not simply refuse? Why this elaborate deception? Because we were not ready, David answered honestly. When we first made contact, you were right. We had 300 ships. You had millions. We controlled 12 systems. You controlled thousands. If we had refused then, you would have crushed us. So we smiled and nodded and paid your taxes while we prepared. Dr. Reed brought up a new display, showing a complex organizational chart. We called it Protocol Sentinel. Every human working in Council space became part of it, whether they knew it or not. Engineers working in your shipyards sent reports on vessel capabilities. Scientists collaborating in research stations noted technological advances. Traders moving through your commerce networks mapped supply chains. Artists performing in cultural centers observed social structures and political divisions. You are describing an intelligence operation spanning the entire galaxy, Vornicus said slowly. Yes, David agreed. For 8 years we watched and learned. We identified every weakness in your empire, every dependency in your supply chains, every rivalry between Council species, every installation that was critical to your operations. And we planned. The hologram shifted to show ship designs. Sleek vessels covered in strange angular plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. While you were counting our conventional warships and feeling secure in your overwhelming numbers, we were building these, Nina explained. Stealth vessels using quantum displacement technology. They do not hide by blocking sensors. They redirect sensor beams around themselves. To your instruments, they look like background radiation, cosmic dust, or empty space. We have been parking them in your territory for 3 years and you never noticed. How many? Vornicus asked, though he looked like he did not want to know the answer. In this sector alone, 4,200 vessels. Throughout Council space, more than enough. Nina's expression remained neutral. Every strategic target has been designated. Every Council homeworld. Every major military installation. Every shipyard capable of constructing capital ships. Every central command hub. We have solutions in place for all of them. The chamber had gone deathly quiet. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Humanity, the species they had dismissed as insignificant, had somehow constructed a fleet large enough to threaten the entire Council and positioned it without detection. But ships are just the beginning, Dr. Reed said quietly. He pulled up images showing microscopic machines so small they could barely be seen even under magnification. We also developed these. We call them nanites. They have been dispersing through Council territories for 2 years now. Delegate Rixner's skin changed to a sickly pale color. What do you mean dispersing? We mean they are already there. In your water systems, in your ventilation networks, in your food distribution channels, on major population centers throughout Council space. Avid's voice was clinical, almost apologetic. They are currently inert, completely harmless. But if activated, they can induce unconsciousness, paralysis, or death, depending on the species and the setting we choose. The chamber erupted again. This time, Vornicus did not even try to restore order. He simply stared at the 3 humans, finally understanding what they had accomplished. David let the chaos continue for a full minute before speaking again. When he did, His voice somehow cut through the noise. We tried peace. You demanded surrender. Now you know what we have prepared. The question is, what happens next? The silence that followed David Grant's question was absolute. In the massive council chamber, hundreds of species from across the galaxy waited to hear what humanity truly wanted. Supreme Arbiter Vornicus gripped his gravity hammer so tightly that cracks appeared in the ancient metal handle. His glowing eyes fixed on the three humans standing calmly on the gravity platform below. David took a slow breath. Everything depended on the next few minutes. They had demonstrated strength, revealed capabilities the Council never suspected existed. Now came the harder part, turning that strength into something other than mutual destruction. Supreme Arbiter, honored delegates, David began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. We need to understand something about humanity before we continue. We are not conquerors. We have no interest in building an empire or subjugating other species. We simply want to be left alone to determine our own future. Delegate Rixner made a sound like grinding metal. Then why this display of force? Why threaten us if you claim peaceful intentions? Because you gave us no choice, Captain Nina Cross replied. Every species that has tried peaceful resistance to Council integration has failed. The Talvek people negotiated for 7 years before your blockade starved them into submission. The Grenchi sent diplomats for a decade before you dismantled their government. Peaceful resistance does not work against the sea. Ouncil, you only understand force. Dr. Thomas Reed pulled up another holographic display. This one showed a simple graph tracking Council expansion over the past 1,000 years. The line climbed steadily upward, consuming species after species, world after world, with barely a pause. Reed explained. First contact. Initial friendship, gradually increasing demands. Economic pressure. Military intimidation. Then integration, which is just a polite word for conquest. We studied this pattern carefully. We realized that by the time a species recognizes what is happening, it is already too late. You control their trade, their resources, their military capabilities. Resistance becomes impossible. So we had to resist before it was impossible, David continued. We had to prepare while you still thought we were weak and compliant. We had to build our capabilities in secret while smiling at your ambassadors and paying your taxes. Vornicus leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the gravity platform. You still have not answered the question. What do you want? You hold weapons to our heads. You threaten our worlds. For what purpose? David held up one hand, raising a single finger. First, Earth and all human colonies are immediately recognized as fully sovereign and independent. No council governance. No tribute payments. No restrictions on our military development, territorial expansion, or trade relationships. We answer to no authority but our own. The chamber erupted in protests, but David continued speaking, his voice rising above the noise. He raised another finger. The Council will reduce its military presence in the Outer Rim territories by 60% within 1 standard year. You claim your fleets provide protection, but we both know they exist primarily to intimidate younger species into submission. That ends. This is madness, Delegate Morlax protested, his translucent skin flashing angry red patterns. You cannot dictate terms to the Council. We are the legitimate governing authority of civilized space. Legitimate according to whom? Nina asked. Did the 47 species you integrated in the last century vote to join? Were they given a real choice? Or were they presented with the same false choice you gave us? Submit or be destroyed. David raised a third finger. Third, all species currently designated as protectorates will be offered genuine independence. Not conditional freedom with council overseers watching their every move. Real sovereignty. They can choose to maintain relationships with the council, but it must be voluntary. It would destroy everything we have built. Vornicus said, his voice heavy with something that might have been grief or rage. 3,000 years of bringing order to chaos. 3,000 years of preventing wars and creating prosperity. You would tear it all down based on your primitive ideas of freedom. You would replace empire with actual community, Dr. Reed corrected gently. Supreme Arbiter, We have studied your history extensively. We know that the Galactic Council was not always like this. When your species and 5 others founded it 3,000 years ago, it was meant to be a forum for equals. A place where different civilizations could meet, trade, share knowledge, and resolve disputes peacefully. The hologram behind the humans changed, showing ancient records from the Council's founding. Images of 6 species meeting as partners, not rulers and subjects. What happened? David asked. When did the Council stop being a community and become an empire? When did you start conquering instead of cooperating? Vornicus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost thoughtful. It was gradual. A crisis here, a conflict there. We intervened to prevent wars. We established protocols to maintain peace. We required compliance to ensure stability. Each step seemed necessary at the time. Each expansion of authority was justified by circumstances. And slowly, over centuries, we became what we once opposed. Exactly, David said. And now, you have a choice. You can continue down this path until you have consumed the entire galaxy, creating resentment and hatred that will eventually tear your empire apart from within. Or you can change course. Return to your founding principles. Become a forum for equals again, instead of a hierarchy of masters and servants.
Alligate.
Rixner stood abruptly. Even if we wanted to accept your terms, which we do not, you hold weapons over our heads. How is that different from what you accuse us of doing? You threaten destruction unless we obey. You are no better than us. Ina's expression hardened. There is one critical difference, delegate. We are not asking you to surrender your sovereignty. We are not demanding tribute or military control or economic integration. We are simply demanding that you leave us alone. And more importantly, we are offering you something you never offered the species you conquered. What? Rixner demanded. A way out, David answered. He pulled a small data chip from his pocket and held it up for all to see. This contains complete specifications for everything we have deployed. Our stealth technology, our nanot designs, our intelligence gathering methods, our fleet compositions, and tactical doctrines, everything. The chamber went deathly quiet. In 6 hours, David continued, we are going to broadcast this information to every species in the galaxy. Not just council members. Everyone. The protectorates. The isolated civilizations. The conquered worlds. Every species that you currently control through superior technology and military force will have access to the same capabilities. Vornicus rose to his full height, understanding dawning on his scaled face. You are not trying to conquer us. You are trying to make conquest impossible. Yes, David said simply. Once every species has access to the same technology, your empire becomes unsustainable. You cannot maintain control through military superiority when everyone has equally powerful militaries. You cannot force integration when younger species can defend themselves effectively. You will cause chaos, Vornicus warned. Wars? Conflicts? Without central authority to maintain order, species will fight each other for resources and territory. Perhaps, David acknowledged. Or perhaps species will learn to cooperate voluntarily when they can no longer be forced. Perhaps they will form alliances based on mutual benefit instead of coercion. It will be messy and complicated and imperfect. But it will be free, Nina finished. Dr. Reed stepped forward, his expression earnest. Supreme Arbiter, we are not naive. We know that releasing this technology will create instability. We know that some species will use it for aggression rather than defense. But we believe the alternative is worse. Your empire is already showing cracks. Resentment grows in the protectorates. Younger species whisper about rebellion. You maintain control through fear, and fear eventually turns to hatred. We are offering you a chance to step back from the edge, David said. Reform the council into what it was meant to be. A voluntary forum for cooperation instead of a forced hierarchy. Guide the transition instead of being swept away by it. Vornicus looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. He saw fear in some faces, anger in others. But in a few, he saw something else. Understanding, perhaps? or recognition that the humans might be right. You ask the impossible, Vornicus said finally. Even if I agreed, many council species would not. They benefit from the current structure. They will resist. David met his gaze steadily. Then they can resist. And they can face the consequences when every species they have oppressed suddenly has the means to fight back. The age of empires is ending. Supreme Arbiter. The only question is whether it ends peacefully or in fire. Supreme Arbiter Vornicus stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. Around him, the council chamber had descended into barely controlled chaos. Delegates argued with each other in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate military action against Earth. Others called for negotiations. A few sat in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible situation. David Grant watched it all with careful attention. This was the moment where everything could collapse. If even one council species decided to launch a preemptive strike, if even one delegate convinced enough others to choose war over compromise, millions would die. Possibly billions. Captain Nina Cross kept her hand near her wrist display, ready to send the signal that would activate humanity's hidden weapons. Her face showed nothing. But David could see the tension in her shoulders. Dr. Thomas Reed was reviewing data on his own device, monitoring communications throughout the council fleet to detect any signs of hostile action. Finally, voice cut through the chaos. It was not Vornicus who spoke, but Counselor Felinara of the Yixtari Communion. Her species was ancient, nearly as old as the Krevnar themselves. She stood slowly, her four wings spreading in a gesture that commanded attention. "Honored Council," she said, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. "I have remained silent until now because I needed to consult with my people. The Ixtaria have been part of the Council for 2,000 years. We helped build this institution. We believed in its purpose." As every eye turned toward her. Felinara was rarely heard during council sessions, but when she spoke, others listened. "Ambassador Grant speaks harsh truths," she continued. "The council has strayed from its founding vision. We have become exactly what we once opposed. An empire that conquers through economic pressure and military intimidation while calling it peace and order." "Councilor Delegate," Rixner protested, "you cannot seriously be considering their demands. They threaten us with weapons. They hold our worlds hostage, as we have held theirs," Felinara replied calmly. "As we have held 47 other species in the past century alone. The humans simply found a way to reverse the dynamic. They learned from watching us, and they prepared better than any species we have encountered." She turned to face David directly. "But I have questions before the Yixtari Communion makes its decision. Ambassador Grant, you say you will broadcast your technology to every species in the galaxy. What happens when aggressive species use these weapons against peaceful ones? What happens when your stealth technology and nanites fall into the hands of those who would use them for conquest?" David had expected this question. "Counselor Felinara, that is a real concern. We are not blind to the dangers. But we believe the current system creates even greater dangers. When one entity holds overwhelming power, it inevitably abuses that power. When multiple entities have roughly equal capabilities, they are forced to find peaceful solutions because war becomes too costly for everyone." "Mutually assured destruction," Dr. Reed added. "It is a concept from Earth's own history. When multiple nations possessed weapons capable of destroying each other completely, it paradoxically prevented large-scale wars because no one could win. They had to cooperate instead. He proposed to make the entire galaxy live under the threat of mutual destruction." "Delegate," Moralax asked, his translucent skin flashing disturbed patterns. "We propose to make the galaxy live under the promise of mutual survival through cooperation," David corrected. "Right now, the Council maintains peace through fear and overwhelming force. We suggest that real peace comes from mutual respect and voluntary partnership." Vornicus finally spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of his position. "Even if what you say has merit, the practical difficulties are immense. The Council governs thousands of worlds. Our economy is integrated across hundreds of systems. Our military command structure coordinates millions of vessels. You cannot simply dissolve all of that overnight without causing collapse. We are not asking for overnight dissolution, Nina responded. We understand that transformation takes time. The technology broadcast happens in 6 hours, regardless of your decision. That timeline cannot change because every minute we delay gives your intelligence services more time to interfere. But the actual restructuring of council governance can take years if necessary. David pulled up a new holographic display showing a proposed structure. We call it the Galactic Forum, a voluntary association of sovereign species. No mandatory tribute, no forced military service, no economic coercion. Instead, cooperative trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and collaborative research projects, all voluntary, all transparent. You expect species to cooperate without central authority? Rixner scoffed. That is idealistic foolishness. Is it? Dr. Reed asked. Look at Earth's own history. We went from hundreds of warring nations to a coordinated global civilization in less than 3 centuries. We did it not through conquest, but through slowly building systems of cooperation. Trade partnerships, defense alliances, cultural exchanges. It was messy and took time, but it worked. Counselor Felinara studied the proposed structure carefully. This forum you propose? Who would lead it? No one, David said. That is the point. It is a forum, not a government. Species meet to discuss common concerns, coordinate responses to threats, share resources and knowledge. But each species remains completely sovereign over its own internal affairs. And if conflicts arise between species, Vornicus asked, if trade disputes escalate to violence, if border disagreements lead to war, then the forum provides a place for mediation and arbitration, David replied. But participation in conflict resolution is voluntary. No species can be forced to accept forum judgments. The only enforcement mechanism is that other species may choose to reduce cooperation with those who act aggressively or dishonestly. Social pressure instead of military force, Felinara mused. It is an interesting concept. Delegate Rixner slammed one of his 4 fists against his console. This is insanity. We are discussing the complete dissolution of galactic order based on the threats of a single upstart species. We should be mobilizing our fleets, not debating philosophy. Feel free to mobilize, Nina said coldly. My finger is on the activation button for our weapon systems. The moment your fleet makes any aggressive move, we launch. 4,000 stealth ships begin firing on strategic targets. Nanites activate throughout your territory, and your grand empire burns. Is that what you want? The chamber fell silent. The reality of the situation hung heavy in the air. The council had always been the one making threats, the one with overwhelming power. Now they were on the receiving end, and they did not like it. Vornicus looked at Felinara. The Yixtar are one of our founding species. Your voice carries great weight. What is your decision? Felinara was quiet for a long moment. The Yixtari Communion has voted. We support the human proposal. We will join this galactic forum and work toward voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance. The Council has served its purpose, but that purpose has ended. It is time for something new. A ripple of shock spread through the chamber. If the Yixtar were breaking ranks, others might follow. Counselor Tevarok of the Zulinary Alliance stood next. His species was known for careful deliberation. The Zulinary have concerns about stability during the transition. However, we recognize that change is coming whether we choose it or not. The humans have made that inevitable. We prefer to guide this change rather than resist it. The Zulinary Alliance supports the formation of the Galactic Forum. One by one, other species began standing. Not all of them. Some remained firmly opposed. But enough were breaking away that the Council's unified front was crumbling. Vornicus watched his carefully maintained consensus disintegrate in real time. 3,000 years of Council authority, undermined in a single session by a species barely out of its own solar system. Vornicus said slowly, his voice carrying resignation and perhaps a hint of respect. You have won. Not through superior military might, but through superior strategy. The Krevnari hegemony will support the formation of the Galactic Forum. We will begin the process of transitioning from mandatory governance to voluntary cooperation. David felt relief flood through him, but he kept his expression neutral. Supreme Arbiter, this is not about winning or losing. This is about finding a better way forward for all species. Perhaps Vornicus replied. Or perhaps you have simply replaced one form of coercion with another. Only time will tell. Council chamber had fallen into an uneasy quiet after Supreme Arbiter. Vornicus announced his support for the Galactic Forum. David Grant stood on the gravity platform. Watching as various species processed what had just happened, some delegates looked relieved. Others appeared angry or confused. A few simply sat in shock, unable to comprehend how quickly their entire galactic order had been nunded. Then Delegate Rixner stood abruptly, his forearms gesturing wildly. This is unacceptable. The Council cannot simply dissolve based on threats from a primitive species. I call for an immediate vote to reject these demands and authorize military action against Earth. Several other delegates rose in support. David felt his heart rate spike. This was the danger moment. If enough Council species chose to fight rather than adapt, everything would collapse into war. Captain Nina Cross's hand moved toward her wrist display. But David caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Not yet. Let this play out. Vornicus raised his gravity hammer. Delegate Rixner, you may call for a vote. That is your right. But understand what you are voting for. You are voting to destroy your own worlds in exchange for destroying theirs. You are voting for mutual annihilation. Better that than surrender. Rixner shouted. Several other delegates voiced agreement. Councillor Felinara spread her wings again, the gesture commanding silence. Delegate Rixner, before you push for this vote, consider carefully. The humans have already won. The technology broadcast happens in 5 hours, regardless of what we decide here. Within days, every species in the galaxy will have access to the same capabilities we currently monopolize. The Empire is already over. The only question is whether we transition peacefully or die fighting against the inevitable. She speaks truth, Councillor Tevrock added. I have been receiving reports from my intelligence services. They confirm that human stealth vessels are positioned throughout our territory. They confirm quantum signatures matching the numbers the humans claim. They confirm nanite dispersal in our major population centers. All of this is real. Fighting accomplishes nothing except mass death. Rixner's skin changed colors rapidly, showing his distress. So we simply accept their terms? Allow them to dictate galactic policy? They are not dictating policy, Dr. Thomas Reed interjected calmly. They are ending our ability to dictate policy. There is a difference. We can still participate in the Galactic Forum. We can still trade, form alliances, pursue our interests. We simply cannot force others to obey us anymore. That is still unacceptable, another delegate declared. The Kesari Collective will not participate in this forum. We will maintain our own territories and defend them against all threats. David N. Odid slowly. That is your right, delegate. The forum is voluntary. No species is forced to join. But understand that species within your current territories may choose independence now that they have the means to enforce it. And the forum will likely support their sovereignty. The implications hung in the air. The Council's empire was not just transitioning to a new form, it was dissolving entirely. Each species would have to renegotiate relationships with former HMOE, protectorates on equal terms. Vornicus struck his gravity hammer one final time. The vote will proceed. All those in favor of military action against Earth and rejection of the Galactic Forum proposal, signal now. 19 species signaled support. David counted carefully, calculating how this would affect the transition.
All those opposed to military action and supporting the forum proposal.
Signal now. 34. Species signaled support, including the Krevnar, Yuxtari, and Zulinari. The 3 founding species carrying enormous political weight. The remaining 17 species abstain, Vornicus announced. The motion for military action is rejected. The Council accepts the formation of the Galactic Forum. Rixner made a sound of disgust and stormed from the chamber, several other delegates following him. David watched them go with concern. 19 species opposed to the transition could cause significant problems during the changeover period. Ambassador Grant Vornicus said heavily, "You have your agreement. The Council will begin the transition process. But understand that this will not be smooth. Many species benefit from the current structure. They will resist change however they can." "We understand," David replied. "Change is never easy, but it is necessary." Nina checked her wrist display. "For hours and 37 minutes until the technology broadcast. Supreme Arbiter, we recommend that you prepare your populations. There will be panic when people realize the protections they relied on are no longer exclusive to Council species." Vornicus nodded wearily. "I will address my people shortly. This will be the most difficult speech of my life." The 3 humans were escorted from the Council chamber by security forces who looked at them with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. As they walked through the massive station corridors, David finally allowed himself to exhale. "We did it," Dr. Reed said quietly. "We actually did it." "Started it," Nina corrected. "The hard part comes next. Making sure the transition does not collapse into chaos." They reached their diplomatic vessel, a small human ship that looked tiny compared to the massive Council craft surrounding it. Once inside and certain they were secure, David activated his communication system and sent a coded signal back to Earth. "Protocol Sentinel, Phase 2 complete. Council has accepted forum proposal. Begin technology broadcast on schedule." The response came immediately from Admiral Patricia Hayes, commander of Earth's Hidden Fleet. "Confirmed. All vessels standing down from combat readiness. Broadcast will commence in 4 hours and 30 minutes. David sank into a chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion hit him. They had been planning this moment for 8 years, training for it, preparing for every possible outcome, and somehow, against all odds, they had succeeded without firing a single shot. "What happens now?" Dr. Reed asked. "Now we wait," David replied. "In 4.5 hours, every species in the galaxy learns that the balance of power has fundamentally changed. Then we see how they react." Those 4 hours felt like an eternity. David, Nina, and Dr. Reed monitored communications throughout Council space, watching as the news spread. Vornicus made his address to the Krevnari people, explaining what had happened with surprising honesty. Other Council leaders followed suit, some angry, some resigned, a few actually optimistic about the changes then. The moment arrived. From Earth and from human stations throughout the galaxy, the broadcast began. Technical specifications, design schematics, manufacturing processes. Everything needed to build stealth vessels, produce nanites, establish intelligence networks, and defend against superior forces. The galaxy exploded with reactions. Some species celebrated their newfound ability to resist oppression. Others panicked at the thought of their enemies gaining such powerful weapons. A few immediately began planning how to use the technology for their own conquests. David watched it all unfold on his displays. "This is going to be messy." "Freedom usually is," Nina replied. 6 months later, David stood in a very different chamber. The first Galactic Forum had been established on a neutral station, built specifically for this purpose with contributions from 40 species. Unlike the Council chamber, with its hierarchical tiers, this space was designed with all delegates on the same level. Arranged in a circle with no position more prominent than any other, 218 species had chosen to participate. Not all former Council members, and not all former protectorates. Some species had chosen to remain isolated. Others had formed their own regional alliances. A few had immediately gone to war with neighbors, using their new capabilities to settle old grudges, but the majority had chosen cooperation. They recognized that in a galaxy where everyone had roughly equal power, cooperation was more beneficial than conflict. David had been appointed Earth's permanent representative to the Forum, though he had insisted that the position rotate every 2 years. Today was the Forum's opening session, and he had the honor of delivering humanity's first address. "Honored delegates," he began, looking around at the incredible diversity of species present. 6 months ago, Earth delivered a message to the Galactic Council. We tried peace. When that failed, we showed our strength. Not to conquer, but to ensure we could never be conquered. He paused, letting his words settle. But strength without purpose is just violence. So let me clearly state humanity's purpose here. We want to explore. We want to learn. We want to create. We want to trade stories and knowledge and friendship with species we have only just met. Around the circle, various species showed signs of attention. Some leaned forward. Others adjusted their translation devices to ensure they captured every word. We want what every species wants: the freedom to determine our own future among the stars, and we believe that desire is universal. That is why we fought. Not to rule, but to ensure no one could rule us. And not just us, but any species. Counselor Felinara, now representing the Yixtari in the forum, spoke. Ambassador Grant, the transition has not been without difficulties. 7 conflicts have erupted between species in the past 6 months. Some blame humanity for destabilizing the galaxy. The galaxy was already unstable, David replied. It was held together by force and fear. We simply revealed that instability. Yes, there have been conflicts. But there have also been 40 new trade agreements between former enemies. There have been joint research projects. There have been cultural exchanges. The violence gets attention, but cooperation is happening too. Delegate Moralax, whose species had initially opposed the forum, but eventually joined, raised a question. What happens when a powerful species uses these technologies for conquest? When they build fleets and attack weaker neighbors? Then other species band together to stop them, Nina replied from her position as military advisor. That is the purpose of mutual defense pacts. No single species can dominate when others can coordinate resistance, Dr. Reed added. We are not naive. We know there will be bad actors. But we believe a system where everyone has roughly equal capabilities creates better outcomes than one where a single entity holds overwhelming power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The session continued for hours. Delegates debated protocols, discussed potential crises, and began building the frameworks for interspecies cooperation. It was messy and complicated, and occasionally contentious, but it was free. As David left the chamber that evening, Vornicus approached him. The former Supreme Arbiter looked smaller somehow, less imposing without the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Ambassador Grant, he said quietly, I wanted to thank you. David looked at him in surprise. Thank me? For destroying your empire? For saving my people, Vornicus corrected. The council was dying, suffocated by its own weight. In another century, maybe 2, it would have collapsed violently. Rebellion would have swept through the protectorates. Billions would have died. You forced us to change before that collapse became inevitable. You gave us a chance to transition peacefully. He extended a clawed hand. The Krevnario, humanity, a debt. We will not forget that. David shook his hand, feeling the strength in those ancient scales. We are not keeping score, Supreme Arbiter. We are just trying to build something better. Former Supreme Arbiter Vornicus corrected with something like a smile. I am just a delegate now, like everyone else. David watched him walk away, then turned to look through the viewing window at the stars beyond. Out there, hundreds of species were navigating this new reality. Some would succeed, some would fail, but they would all do it freely. Earth had delivered its message. We tried peace. When that was rejected, we showed our true answer. Not conquest, not submission, but defiance in service of freedom, and the galaxy would never be the same. Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.